If you could tell one last story, if you had no more chances to tell any stories ever again, what would that last story be for you?
Oh my, that's a scary one.
So tough. Do people have answers to this?
Yeah, I struggled with this one too.
Oh, that is a good question.
I struggle with this question too. It's so final.
Man, I hate that question.
You hate his favorite question?
I hate his favorite question. From cave drawings to family histories to stories around the fire, humans crave order among chaos, connection amid isolation. So we tell stories. Our mission at the Storytellers Network is to bring the art of story to the masses. Whether you're in marketing, you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing your own personal brand, telling your story effectively can make the difference between celebrating milestones and collecting unemployment. The Storytellers Network strives to help storytellers tell their stories so you can learn from the best. Now, your host, the inbound evangelist himself, Dan Moyle.
Welcome to the Storytellers Network podcast. Listen, if you're a new listener, this episode is a great starting point. And if you're a regular, then you're in for a real treat. After more than 50 interviews, one of my favorite moments is still my final question in these conversations. Each of my guests is a storyteller in some way. So this question, it always seems to get them. And I kind of catch them off guard, even when they know it's coming. But I think it's more than just that. See, after all these interviews, one thing that I've come to really kind of realize is that our humanity is tied to our storytelling. See, from the earliest dawn of humankind, we've used story for survival and for connection. It's in us. And with that in mind, can we really separate our storytelling from our existence as humans? Well, I wanted to go back to each episode over this last year and listen to every person's answer to this question. I think it says a lot about each of them, from sharing faith to telling a family story, from the simple to the complex. When I ask, if you could only tell one last story, what would that story be? I am genuinely intrigued and on the edge of my seat for every single answer. And I hope you feel the same way. Listen to these next 2 episodes of Last Stories and think about what you would want your last story to be. I hope it's a little inspirational and kind of get you thinking here at the end of the year. Without further ado, here are the last stories of our 54 guests of the Storytellers Network, class of 2018. All right, man. So it all comes down to this one for you. I want to know that if you could only tell one last story, what would that story be?
Oh, but that made me sad. If I had to tell a story, I would love to tell the story of how my dad brought us here and filled us with dreams for all of us to, my brothers and sisters, there's 6 of us, for all of us to become who we become. We've all become really successful, but I would love to tell the story of him leaving with 0 and getting us here. And everyone's done that story, but I'd love to tell it regardless, because the one story I haven't told is the one that I most admire, which is my father, and his dream to bring us here. Of course, my mom, but my dad's vision was to bring us to America, which has given us all so much. And so I would love to tell his story from his perspective, and can only hope that he's proud now, that hopefully we fulfilled all of his dreams and our own. But that would be my last story if I had to pick one to end the ball game with.
And is he still with us?
Yeah, he's still with us. He's getting a little older, which might be a little bit why it's a sensitive issue. Like I told you, I just came back to the room that he let me start in, right? My company was born in this room. My dreams were born in this room. And so even kind of talking to you and you telling me that I made it, it feels weird in this room. 30 years later, someone is sort of validating the long journey. And it's almost hard to hear it, right?
Yeah.
I just hope that before my dad is gone, that he sees that we fulfilled his dreams. And I would love to at some point make a movie or something about his life.
Well, I hope you do. I think that'd be a fantastic story of hope and success and
absolutely
and everything. So cool, Neil. Well, hey man, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it very much. But I want to get to this one though. This is my favorite question. If you could only tell one last story, what would that story be? What would it look like? How would you go out with one last story in your life?
Yeah. Wow. I think I have multiple stories, but I wouldn't use any of my personal ones well, I would probably use my personal ones to tell a mega story. The story that I would want people to understand, or that I would try to convey, is that you are absolutely more powerful, more smart, more anything that you think that you're not. You have the potential to be great. And you just need to find that thing. You need to find that passion. You need to find that consistency. And then the most important part of this, you need to find that belief in yourself to be able to get to the next level. Like, one of the things that just, it just gets me is when you can see somebody who feels like they're stuck, and then you teach them something or say something to them, and you can see that light bulb moment of like, oh, I can be somebody. And Dan, I think it is because that would be my last story, because I go back to the math teacher and telling me I would never amount to anything, and me believing for probably the first, what I would call half of my life, or maybe fourth, because hopefully I live a really long time. But for that, 20 to 26 years, first part of my life, believing like, man, I'm going to be nothing. Like, I'm going to work a dirt job, and I'm going to have a dirt house, and I probably will never be happy, and I don't deserve to be happy. Like, and then me having the aha moment, that light bulb moment of like, you know what? I'm destined for something greater than this, and I believe it. So now if I believe it, how do I achieve it? Right. And there's this whole other thing that, and if you hear this and this is like, ooh, I want to know more, then you can hit me up on the socials. But it comes down to this thing that I'm starting to go with in my mind, is that everybody wants to dream. Right. And we should dream big, even though I posted that to people the other day, quit dreaming big, but there was a reason. You have to dream big. Once you have your big dream, you've got to kind of pull that big dream into goals.
Yeah.
And then out of those goals, you have to create musts. There's 3 layers. Like, if you feel you're destined to be more than you are right now, then those are the 3 layers. It's dreams, goals, and musts.
And that is a mic drop story right there.
Boom.
That's good, man. I like that last story of helping. What it comes back to is helping others see themselves as bigger, right?
Yes.
Positivity in the world, helping you, staying humble. I love it, man.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you one last question, though.
Yeah.
I want to get to your choke up moment. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I want to know if you could only tell one last story and be done calling yourself a storyteller, and just have to go work at just digging ditches, what would that last story be for you?
Oh, it'd be a story about a guy who had only one story to tell and had to go dig ditches. That'd be tragic. I think for me, I think the heart of what you're saying is, what's the essence of a story that inspires you in some ways? Kind of like Sam Phillips telling Johnny Cash in the movie Walk the Line, like, what would you say? What song would you sing if you're in a ditch? Which that didn't really happen that way. I'm a pretty big student of Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
And anyway, I'd probably do something about Johnny Cash, actually.
Yeah.
I find stories of I think we all are drawn to like redemption stories. And I think that's why probably I get excited about like anything Johnny Cash, because his life was such a train wreck for so long. And to go out on top, I actually just did I'll answer your question this way, because frankly I don't know. But here's what else. I did a talk about this at an event of like 6 months ago. I find Johnny Cash's life super fascinating because he did everything he possibly could to ruin it in every way. He was an awful husband, not only to his first wife, but he was an awful husband to June. She had a tremendous amount of grace for him. He did have a relationship with Jesus, and I do think that was true 100%. It seems accurate, but he was a very sinful, vice-filled person. honestly, up until the end. But God saw to it that he could stay on the earth long enough to have an artistic redemption. And so you're doing it. I'm getting all choked up a little bit. You can't tell yet, but I am. I did a talk on this, though, because I find it so awesome that the fact that he got to hang on long enough to have an artistic redemption at the end of his career by working with Rick Rubin and doing the American recordings. And I think it just really fascinates me because there's so many wonderful artistic celebrities and, people that end up committing suicide or ending their life early because I don't know why. I can't even get in their headspace to think why I want to do that. But it's always tragic. And I think at some point deep down, they're having this wager of, should I burn out bright or should I fade away? I think celebrities have such a fear of becoming irrelevant, and that can be damaging to an ego who has had their name in marquees and had all the fame and glory, and then for their ego to sustain that fall from that peak. So Johnny Cash, very similar to a lot of celebrities whose career fell off from the mid-'70s up until about 1995, he was completely irrelevant culturally. And just, the progressives who had embraced him earlier in his career rejected him because now he was a Christian and doing things with Billy Graham. And, his work was really weak. His music was really stale and repetitive. And but he got the chance to do these American recordings with Rick Rubin, totally revived his career, got to go out on a high note that I think any artist or maker would love to do. Think about if you were, 70 years old and putting out the work that's almost the most critically acclaimed work you've ever done, and then you die right after getting all these awards. I'm not saying that earthly accolade should fulfill you, but how awesome that is that he got that chance. And if I ever, I'm not one to, say if I ever go talk to, St. Peter at the pearly gates, I'd love to know, why did Johnny Cash get that second chance when he should have died 15 times at least? When you read his biography and his autobiography, there's so many crazy stories, setting national forests on fire, crawling into a cave, trying to commit suicide, all the drugs. You're just like, how did he hang on? You get to do that work. And I'm so thankful that he did, because we get to have it. We get to hear from this voice for so long. And so that's probably what I do, something about that.
It's a great story to go out on. I love that. Redemption. That's a good one. But I do like to find out, though, if you could tell only one last story and that was it, and you were done telling stories, what story would that be for you? What would that look like?
Oh my God, Dan, that's a really hard question.
It's my favorite.
If I could tell one last story, and then I'm kaput and that's it.
Yeah. Now, I will say this, Billy, you said earlier, we're all natural storytellers, so probably you'd never be done. But if for some reason, you could no longer tell stories as a storyteller, what would that be?
Wow. Well, I don't know. That's a really hard one because it's my mind is filled with stories for sure. And I keep thinking about maybe can I do a story wish?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think my story wish as we create this whole new era of storytellers is that, it's kind of like seeing these Bay Cat young people storytellers grow up. And as they are able to tell their own stories is, my storyteller's wish would be it truly creates a ripple effect that more of these beautiful, authentic stories are told, and that our world does get better, and I think it does come from not fighting each other around these important topics, but really finding the commonality and finding common solutions together. I really believe that can happen. So without putting myself on a spot and trying to think of one last story, that would be my storyteller's wish. How's that?
That's perfect. and that would go such a long way to ending racism one story at a time. So
oh my God,
perfect way to wrap it.
Yeah, I want the stories to be able to replicate and multiply at an exponential rate. so that we could get to a better place. Now, I'm impatient.
Yes, exactly. I'm with you. I love it. Well, Billy, thank you so much for taking time to tell your story and the story of Baycat. As always, the time goes way too fast. I want to ask you my big BHAG, my big hairy audacious goal question. And I know it's theoretical because you could never stop telling stories. Again, it's in your DNA, brother. If you could only tell one last story, whether it's professionally or personally, and be done telling stories, what would be your last story that you told?
The last story that I told, that's a really tough one because there are so many. But what I'll tell is, I'm going to tell it. I've been fortunate. I've been married to the same woman for a long time, and she's an amazing friend. And the stories that I tell quite frequently, because people say, "Well, how have you been married so long?" And what I don't like is everybody says, "Well, your wife should be a saint being married to you for that long." Dan, I don't think I was that bad. But the story that I would tell is it's tied to when we were dating. And the story would be, and this kind of rings true. So I was living in New Hampshire, and Laura was living down just outside of Boston. And when we were dating, we would try to do stuff on the weekends. And she would come up to Nashua, and where I was living, Nashua, New Hampshire. And she would always show up with a box of donuts. And so the door would knock, because we'd have like a whole Saturday plan of stuff to do. And so there'd be the knock at the door, and there's Laura with the big brown eyes and the smile, and a box of donuts. And we'd sit down and we'd plan our day, and every single day we made it a journey. And we'd go and discover something that we didn't discover, and we'd come back and we'd cook together. And just like we talked about earlier, we determine what to cook, and we do it together. And it was always that level of collaboration. So the story is always about, the impact that Laura had on me was based on, her kind of joining the journey and having her story, tying it and weaving our stories early on. And we realized that the two stories together are absolute harmony. So my story is joining the story with somebody that I care about. And for everybody out there, it's, think about it. And, I've had friends that, have had some challenges with relationships and things like that. And, I guess the takeaway is make sure put the stories back together. And that can be a lot of fun. Really tough question, Dan.
You're such a romantic guy at heart, aren't you?
That's the Italian thing.
I love it.
We love our food. We love our romance. And we're amazing.
All right, so this is my favorite part. You know what's coming.
I know it's coming, and I was trying to gear up for it, and I still am striking out.
If somebody told you can no longer tell stories, that you were done doing that, whether it's professionally or whatever, what would that last story look like for you? Personally, professionally, whatever, what would your last story be that you would share?
I did think about this. And I think, if I had the chance, and I have half of the chance now, is to go back and tell my mom and dad's story. My mom passed away in 2011, and I think, she had an incredible story about me, and it's not the story of me, it's more the story of her, how I was born in a snowstorm, and in January, and my dad had gotten both cars stuck in the driveway. My mom, having contraction, has to walk 2 miles to the nearest main road. No, it was about a mile to the nearest main road, to where a waiting ambulance that couldn't get down her subdivision street was waiting for her. And consequently, I heard about this every birthday. Just an FYI. I've heard about it every birthday. And so my mom was walking in my dad's footsteps, and my dad's 6'2", my mom's 5'1". So the snow is up to her waist. They get out to this main road. They get into the ambulance. They're driving down the main road to the hospital, and the gas tank is ripped off of the ambulance by a snowdrift. They're dead. They're dead in the water on this road, and they can't even turn the ambulance on to keep the ambulance warm because it's got no gas. The gas tank's gone. Well, apparently there was a house on the corner where the ambulance had stopped, and she offered her home to my mom and dad, so they were in there for a while. And this is old school. This is back in the 60s. And so an orange snowplow came, and one of those big ones that you see, and here my mom is, in contractions, crawling up into a snowplow to get to the hospital to have me, and then it got stuck. And another snowplow had to come to get the first snowplow out, and the two of them were able to move the snow off to the side enough to get my mom to the hospital. Her obstetrician came in via snowmobile, and then so that whole story of having me, and then as it turned out, 18 hours later, they discovered that I had a birth defect, and they gave me a 50-50 chance of surviving. So I ended up having to go into surgery, and I was at the hospital for a good month. I didn't come home, and that whole story, my mom, and I would love. I never got it recorded, but it'd be cool to have her tell that story, So that would probably be, because, and I know it's about me, but to me it's more about her and her strength to go through all of that for me.
Yeah.
So that's my moment.
Oh, man, I love it. So I want to know, my big question for you, Rick, is if you could only tell one last story and then you were done being a storyteller, what would that story be for you?
Oh boy, that's a good one. You guys need some good questions.
Thanks. That's to date myself a little bit. That's my Barbara Walters moment.
Oh, is it? Yeah. You and I both know we're both who Barbara Walters.
Yeah.
She was an amazing interviewer.
Yeah.
You caught me off guard here. Because I have a lot of different stories and things, but I would just default, and again, I don't want to be repetitious. I think probably for me, what the highlight of my business career, and I've done a lot of fun things and everything, was when I was able to build the Juice Man business and Trillium Health Products. And this is back again in the early 90s. But a really funny story on how that first got started. I ran into a guy named Jay Kordich, who was actually known as the Juice Man. And again, if any of your listeners are older, he's a guy with the big bushy eyebrows and basically was a fantastic spokesperson for the product. So I was broke at the time and trying to start this business. And I ran into Jay, and I said, okay, I'll do the business part, you do the talking part. And so the very first thing I did was I knew some friends that had a small PR firm in New York, and we were able to book them on a talk show in New York called the Richard Bay Show, and it was on a super station called WWOR. And Jay got on there and brought his juicer with him, and basically created lots of juices, and it was supposed to be a 5-minute segment and expanded to about a 15-minute segment. And at the end of the segment, Jay said, this again, pre-internet, send $1, a pre-addressed stamp envelope with $1, and I'll send you out my 12 favorite juice recipes. And the station put our post office box address up for about probably 25 seconds. And this happened again, this is going back to 1989, but it happened a week before, right about this time is actually the weekend right before the 4th of July holiday. And so nothing happened for a week. And then right after the 4th of July, the Monday after the 4th of July weekend, a mail truck pulls up outside of our office, and the mailman gets out, and he has a 3-foot-high canvas sack over his shoulder, looks like Santa Claus, brings it into our office, drops it off, goes back out to the truck, gets another sack, brings it in. In all, they brought 4 sacks of letters into our office, and we had 18,000 responses, and probably about half of them sent $1 in. So what we did was, so we had $9,000 that people sent us. We went down to the local printer and we printed up a dozen juice recipes, but also put an order form on the back on how you could order a machine, mailed that out to the 18,000 letters, and enough people ordered juicers from that initial mailing that we were able to start the business. So that's a fun story that I like to tell about how we started the Trillium Health products in the juice business.
Oh, that's awesome. I could just picture it, but walking like Santa Claus. Wait, how many bags? Like, that's awesome. And almost by accident, it sounds like, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of things that just came together correctly. And the fact that the TV station, you know, put up our post office address and, you know, and then we just basically were able to take advantage of the interest in it and respond to it. And again, you know, from a marketing perspective, that's a great story. And if there was an internet back when we were doing it, we would have basically sent people to a website, and logistically everything would have been more simply. So the techniques still work. The delivery vehicles have just changed.
So even though you're only an aspiring storyteller, maybe you haven't told enough stories to be done yet, but if somebody said to you, Rand, you're done telling stories, what would your last story be that you'd want to go out on? What would that look like for you?
I mean, it would definitely be, it would definitely be the story of my sort of romance with Geraldine.
Yeah.
That is so far the thing that I am most proud of in my life, the thing that brings me the most joy. Yeah. And maybe a story that I haven't talked about very much.
That would be a good, I would listen to that story.
Yeah. That's a worthwhile story to tell.
So you love story, obviously. You're very good at it. But if somebody said to you, all right, Nick, you can only tell one last story and then you're done telling stories, what would that look like for you?
I'd tell them no.
That's a good story.
Yeah. You know, I would love at some point to find a way to tell, I mean, just based on my faith, the story of the gospel in a way that's really digestible. You know, and not that God didn't do a good job with the Bible. It's just, you know, I even find it hard to read. You know, it's just, a lot of it's just archaic language. And so, you know, without changing the spirit of it or the message or whatever, I would love to find a way to tell that in a digestible format. And even if it wasn't digestible to everybody, to some portion of the world that was more digestible than the current format.
That's a great answer, man. I love it. It's funny. I did not set out to create a faith-based podcast, but so many people I talk to have strong faith in some way. And that's just, that's awesome, man. God is good. So
yeah, we gotta have faith in something, man. You know? And so it's like, at the end of the day, like I have many friends who are non-believers or atheists or people of other religions, but you know, that's totally cool. I love it. I mean, Jesus said to love them. That's what I'm gonna do. And so, and not that I'm better than them or more right than them, whatever. But the thing that anytime you get down to it, people have faith in something, because what, the first atom created more atoms? Like, no, you're having faith in something happened. You just don't, you have science to get to the end of your rope, and I have a different way of getting there.
The time always goes way too fast when I'm in a great conversation. But before I let you go, I want to ask you my big question. This is my favorite one. You are a storyteller professionally, personally. Obviously, you're obsessed with story. But if someone told you that you could tell no more stories, what? But one last one. What would that last story be for you?
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, Dan, that is such an amazing question that you've taken me off guard, and I have to think about what would that amazing story be. You know, it would probably be about my family, I guess. You know, I would want to leave the world with, you know, the story of my family and you know, the good things that they've done in the world and where they are. That may sound from a selfish perspective, you know, that would have value. I would love to do a story about my mom. You know, she was a nurse for many years and did some amazing things in her philanthropic life. And then from a non-selfish perspective, I would love to be able to tell more stories about the people who are not able to physically travel. Some of the veterans that we encounter, you know, on a weekly basis, who aren't able to get out and do more things. We're losing those guys at a rate of 500 a day nationwide, less than that, because many of them have now passed away. World War II veterans are passing away at an alarming rate. And pretty soon, all of those stories are going to be gone. And there are great efforts underway to try to capture them before they go. But that would be, you know, if I had the ability to wave a magic wand, I would say I would want all of those veteran stories to be captured in a way that, you know, people could truly understand what they went through and the sacrifices that they made for their country so long ago.
So basically, you won't stop telling stories. What that comes down to, which is great. Which is great.
No, and even, you know, even though I'm not working at a TV station anymore and under a deadline of turning stories, you know, as a business person and with our product Helium, you're always a storyteller, always.
So if somebody said to you, Dominic, you're all done telling stories, you can't be a storyteller anymore, but you can tell one last one. We'll give you one more. What would that last story be for you?
That story. That's quite a question. The way I would tell it is that whatever you want to achieve, it's possible. So many people have come from nothing, far less talented, far less educated, far less fiscal resources, and they've achieved great things. J.K. Rowling lived in her car. Abraham Lincoln lived in a log cabin. So you start to see, and that would be, to me, my story that I would like to share is just that whatever you set out to achieve, it is possible. And I hope that I can help people achieve those things. I hope that I can change the world and uplift people, and we'll see what happens.
It's been a pleasure, Luke. We got introduced by mutual friend Chris Tatum, and I think it was a wise introduction. Appreciate you taking time today. I want to, before I let you go, two things. Number one, I want to find out if you were told tomorrow that you could tell no more stories, what would be your last story you'd want told?
I think I would want to do something about the polar region. This is an area that have always been fascinated about, and have always just, that's like my end all be all. I've always joked that, like, if I get to do a story about polar bears, that'll be my last thing, because there's no point of ever shooting more, because it can't get better than that. And probably a little exaggeration, but I think that, and obviously there's the climate change side of everything like that. But for me, it's just the passion. Like, I am passionate about that region of the world. I'm passionate about the changes going on there, and as well as just the inhabitants of that, all the animals. And I think it's just a fascinating region. So I think telling a story about that, the human animal relationship up there, it would really be my number one story that I'd love to tell.
That's a great one to go out on. So I want to ask you the big one. This is going to stump you, maybe not. If somebody told you, Mike, you're all done telling stories, man, you got to find something else to do professionally, or just personally, what would that last story look like for you? What would you want to go out on with one last story?
It had to be something in the nonprofit sector, some kind of a do good story that's going to be like saving the world from this, I don't know, or, you know, some kind of a fundraising that, you know, ends children homelessness, you know, like some kind of a PSA type of a thing that just go viral and makes a social impact somehow.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time today, Ed. This has been fascinating. It's great to reconnect. I want to wrap up with one more though before I let you go.
Yep.
You're not getting off the hot seat yet. If somebody said to you, "All right, Ed, you're all done being a storyteller. You got to go do something else," and you had to tell your one last story, what would that story be for you going out on?
What would be my last story to tell? Wow. You know what? It wouldn't have to be something epic as far as grandiose. It would have to be well written, first of all. It has to be well shot and edited. There'd have to be something in it that would make people think, something that was said or something in the script. And I want something visual that somebody's going to go, wow, that's really cool. Whether it's a creative shot, creative editing, creative use of some other visual element. So that's a good question. That's a real stumper, but I just want it to be clean, concise, and impactful. And I think that'd be a good way to go out without, you know, I don't need fanfare. I just want to go out as somebody that maybe did what he loved and did it well. And hopefully people can see that and sense that in the work as they watch it.
It's a great way that would be a great way to go out for sure. And I guess maybe the lesson is we as storytellers strive for that every day, so that if it is our last story, we went out with quality, right?
Absolutely. No question about it.
This has been more fun than you can imagine, my friend.
Stop! Oh my gosh! Thank you. I feel like I feel like time has just flown by, and I've just realized I've taken up like an hour of your time, just like prattling.
You could take up many more. This has been a lot of fun. If I was closer, you may have to have a double date with my wife and me and Randy. This is a lot of fun.
I love double dates. I do.
If I make it to Seattle, I'll let you know.
Please do. Please do. I would love that.
But I want to wrap up with my last question, my big one.
Yeah.
This is my fun one. This is for me.
Okay.
You're a storyteller, but if you were told that you could only tell one last story and be done telling stories specifically, what would that story be?
Wow. Why do I want to cry? That is, I'm like so emotional by just that question. Wow. I could tell one last story. I think it would be the story about my first date with Rand, which I've told before, but I think it would be that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've told that story so many times. But yeah, the story of how I met my husband is one of my favorite ones. So it would probably be that. But I want to cheat, and I want to say that I would tell the story of my relationship with my husband in real time, or, you know, like, and then like I have to keep telling it until that story ends. So, you know, like, but yeah, I think I would tell the story of my first date with Rand if I had one last story left to tell, which is funny because I basically told it in the book. So, but I don't know, for some reason that made me super emotional. That made me so sad to think about. Wow. Yeah, I might need to reflect on that one. What's your answer? Do you have an answer to that?
You know, it's funny because after almost 40 interviews, I've heard everybody's different answers. Mm-hmm. I've heard so many good ways to say that and what that would be. One of my favorite was I asked Al Getler what his would be, and he said it would be whatever happened yesterday. I was like, what do you mean? Like literally yesterday? He's like, no, whatever happened yesterday, because I'm always telling stories. So whatever happened yesterday impacted me in some way. I would tell that, whatever that was. Like, wow. they've all been incredible. And so I think for me at this particular point, my answer would be, I would want to tell a story about what I've learned from talking to storytellers. I would want to take all of this information over 40 interviews or whatever, and share one story about that with people to inspire and change their lives, so that I could go out on a high note.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think for me, like, so much of my life centers around like this love story that I have with my husband, right? So much of it, that if I only had one story left to tell, I just can't imagine that it would be anything but that one. Yeah.
I love it. That's powerful. And it shows me that it's okay to be a romantic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very cynical romantic, so it works, right? Like, I think I'm very realistic about it. I'm like, yeah. But what this reminds me of is, there's a Donna Tartt book, and I can't remember the name of it, The Secret Society. But there's a line in it where he's telling a story, and he says something to the effect of, I realize, like, this is the story I'm telling because basically I've looked at my life and I realize there's no other story left to tell. And I just thought that was such a powerful statement. I was like, wow. So, yeah.
That's a good one. I love it.
Yeah, I like
Thank
that
you
line.
so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's cool. So you use video, you use web, you use speech, audio, you use all these different things to tell a story. But if somebody said to you, Sam, you can only tell one last story, what would that last story look like for you?
You really should have read your prep doc. What story would that be? If I can only tell one story. I was in college and I went back to high school. I was doing a project where I was interviewing like teachers or something like that. I don't remember what it was, and I go and I'm interviewing a bunch of kids in the honors classes and the AP classes and everything else like that. And, those kids are very impressive, very smart, very hardworking. But it's kind of easy for them, right? Like I slept through my entire AP language class and still got a perfect score on the exam. And that's neat. But then I was talking to this other kid who was in high school, and I was asking him, he wants to join the Marines and stuff like that, right? And I'm like, why are you, how do you feel about math? A lot of people say, why should I bother learning math? I'm never going to use this. And he's like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to do push-ups on the battlefield. I still do push-ups. And he busted his butt, working really, really hard to get his like C average. And I think that I've always remembered that kid. I've always remembered that story versus all of the other like smart slackers that I had met that are kind of funny, right? And it's funny to tell stories about, and I was one of them, right? Versus somebody who doesn't do as well, but tries a lot harder. They have the resilience, they have the strength of character, and especially to have that level of maturity to be like, he's doing push-ups for his brain by learning something he's never going to use in the future. I think that is a kid that I think about a lot as somebody that I respect a lot more than somebody who's just smart. So congratulations, whether nature or nurture, you managed to become a genius. Like that's nice and all. I'm way more impressed by people who actually have to work for it, like that kid.
If somebody told you, now maybe this would be easy for you because you don't label yourself as a storyteller, but if somebody said to you, all right, Michael Stelzner, you're done telling stories. Give us one last one. What would your last story look like?
Holy cow. My last story would take place on the ridge of the Grand Canyon on the northern ridge. To back up a few hours earlier in the day, I was at the top of the ridge and it was snowing and I didn't have gloves. So I took my socks off, put them on my hands and started hiking down the Grand Canyon. About a third of the way down, a sign says, if you don't have a gallon of water, you likely will die, and we will not airlift you out. Are you sure you want to keep going? I decided to keep going. As I'm coming down the canyon, I see people coming up out of the canyon looking like they're dead. And I'm thinking, you're just not as prepared as I am, folks. So eventually get to the flat part of the Grand Canyon with some of my buddies. And it's now time to start going up. And I was like, that wasn't that hard. Of course, I've been going down thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of steps. Now it's time to start going up those steps. And eventually I start realizing all the training that I had been doing was for nothing. My heart did not, my physical stature, even though I was like 21 and in the best shape of my life, I was not prepared. And eventually my friends start getting ahead of me, and I start watching donkeys come past me, and I'm thinking, man, there's some wisdom in the people that took those donkeys. I find a little tree. I yell to one of my friends, hide some of that dried fruit, in the next tree, because it's going to be a while. Eventually I get to the top, and as I'm coming out of that canyon, I see people just heading down for the night. And I'm thinking to myself, you have no clue what you're in for. And eventually crashed. And I think that experience is a metaphor for my life, because that experience is one of, we are never, ever prepared for what's around the bend. Yet sometimes we just got to go for it. And sometimes we got to rely on our friends. And I don't know why that would be the last story I would tell, but that's the one that came into my brain, because it's just kind of a nutso story. That it's a true story that happened to me. And there's so many little sub stories that I could tell, but I would tell the story of the Grand Canyon just because it's a cool story.
And inspirational and educational and everything I know about you.
Yeah.
That you strive for. So that's a good one, man. If somebody said to you, James, you're done telling stories, you got to find something else to do, what would that last story be for you to go out on, do you think?
Oh, got to go out in flaming glory, huh? It would be the story of how my kids make it out of the house. Everybody wants to know what I'm going to do when my kids graduate, when they grow up. So that would be the final tale I tell of how I made that. I got that final kid out of the house without ruining him. That would be my finish line.
Without ruining him. I love it. Man, this has been fascinating. I go back to the idea that I love that how you use social media to tell stories, to highlight stories, to help others, to inspire. So well done there. If before I let you go though, if you could only tell one last story and you were done telling stories, what would that story be?
It would be my own story, because I know it well. I mean, we all know our own stories, and so I would say, where did I come from, and where am I, and again, I could tell you where I came from, and but for the grace and love of God coming in and transforming my life, I know where I would be, and it would be no place good. And so that's the story I'm going to tell to people. Is nothing good that I've done. Anything good, anything that looks well on me, it's not anything I've done. And I'm just thankful for the ability to tell that.
So a story of faith, of gratitude, and of adversity. That's a good one. If somebody said to you, all right, Scott, we're all done telling stories. You can't do it anymore professionally. You can't be a storyteller, but you got one last one you can go out on. What would that story look like for you, do you think?
Oh my gosh. To not tell stories. I mean, that's the way our humanity. Oh boy. This is one of the stories I've shared for many, many years, and it's one that I think tells a great deal about the leadership that I dealt with at Ford. It was December of 2008, and the communications team at Ford was hosting a media scrum, a media event, the month prior to the big Detroit Auto Show. And all of the media were in town, about 200 of them. They were getting briefed on the cars that we were launching. And the double doors to the showroom burst open, and in walk Alan Mullally, the CEO, and Bill Ford, the chairman, the great-grandson of Henry Ford. Shoulder to shoulder, these two giants of the industry walk in. And, they were immediately surrounded by everyone. It's just, kind of like I'm dating myself here, but the old Bugs Bunny cartoon where the hounds are chasing after the rabbit, and they're just all in a clump, right? And they're kind of moving along while they're together. And I was tweeting at the time, just to my own audience. This is before Ford had a well-established Twitter account. And I said, oh my gosh, Bill Ford and Alan Mulally just walked in the room. And somebody from my Twitter audience, God bless them, they said, hey, can you get them to answer any questions on Twitter? And I go, oh, that's fascinating. I never thought of doing that before, like kind of a play-by-play or an interview through Twitter. And again, December of 2008, right? Very, very early days, where Twitter felt like a village. So I went up to Alan's communications director, and I said, hey, do you think Alan would take some questions from the Twitter audience like he is from these media after he's done? She goes, yeah, catch him when he comes out. So the scrum breaks, Alan comes out, and I go, hey, Alan. He goes, hey, Scott, how you doing? You're just friendliest guy, really made it a point to know you. And I said, Alan, we've got some folks that would like you to take questions on Twitter. Would you do that? And he goes, oh, absolutely. What's Twitter? What's Twitter? So, I explained to him, and he goes, oh, that's great. That's great. So right there, I saw that we had a leader who he got in his spirit. He understood the power of communication. It didn't matter what platform it was. He wanted to participate. So we went through about 5 or 6 questions, and then a question came up that said, what kind of car does Alan drive? And I go, this might be like a security issue. Like, I don't know if he's got like guards that are with him all the time and they don't make his route known or whatever.
Right.
And I turned to his communications director. I go, can we ask him this? And she goes, watch this. Ask him. I go, all right, Alan, what kind of car do you drive? Scott, and he grabs my arm and he shakes it emphatically with every word. He goes, I drive a different car every day. And I go, oh, that's awesome. You drive the whole lineup of all the Ford Lincoln vehicles. And he tightens his grip on my wrist. And he goes, no, I drive the competition too. Oh my God. Right? I mean, because at the time, the Detroit automakers were thought to be so myopic and so in their own lane that they didn't care about what the rest of the world was doing. And the fact that Alan took the time to have competitors' cars delivered to him so he could see what they were doing and he could ensure that Ford could beat them at it was revolutionary. And it was all because he was willing to answer questions on Twitter.
Man, that's incredible. That's a story to go on for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm fired up now, Dan.
You are. I could go on for hours, but we don't have that kind of time. I want to give you one last chance, one last question here. I like to end on this one, and hopefully I get you. If somebody told you, Alicia, you are done telling stories,
okay,
what would your last story be?
Oh,
how would you go
on? Seriously. Oh gosh. What would my last story be?
Or what would it look like? How would you want to go out? What would that be for you?
Right. Gosh, you know what? I think it would have to be something about if it's here. It would have to be something about like a love letter to Metro Detroit and Michigan. I was in Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids for 5 years, as you know, and then I've been here in Metro Detroit for 12 years. I met and married my husband here. I'm putting down roots here. I love it. And people have been absolutely gracious and welcoming to me. I mean, obviously, we're all homers. Once you're here, you have that Detroit pride and that Michigan pride. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure, having not been born here, if I would be accepted. And I have been. People are wonderful. They are absolutely wonderful. Michiganders are some of the most generous people you'll ever meet. Anytime, like, you know, we have the Mega March for Animals for the Michigan Humane Society coming up. People come out of the woodwork to come walk with us, whether it's Race for the Cure in Detroit or even in Kalamazoo. We always had folks show up for that and support great causes. You name it, Make-A-Wish, Michigan, Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan, some of the causes that I've been, you know, fortunate enough to work with. And now the Sky Foundation to fight pancreatic cancer, just some of the many organizations I've worked with, Habitat for Humanity. I absolutely feel like people have opened up their arms and welcomed the efforts that myself and my colleagues have done to try to better the community and tell the best stories we could. And at the end of the day, it's the stories about all of them. And when they turn on the TV in the morning to start their day, to put on their makeup with me and my team in the background, or to fix their kids' breakfast before they catch the bus, or, you know, to see what the weather's going to be like before they run outside for a jog, if they're doing it with us, whether it's on TV, whether it's on social media, that is such a privilege and honor. And that would be probably what my final farewell would have to be all about, because it's just gratefulness from my heart to everyone in this area for being so good to me.
That's awesome. That's a great way to go out. I love that Michigan pride.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Even though you weren't born here, we love having you here.
Thank you so much, Dan. Awesome. And it's great to see you too.
And I know you consider yourself a storyteller, but sort of not, because you want to be helpful, not just a storyteller. But somebody said to you, all right, Steph, we're done telling stories. You got to do something else. What would be the last story you'd want to go out on? What would that look like? What would it be? How would that be for you?
Oh, man. You really aren't going to let me off easy.
Mm-hmm.
The last story I can tell. That's really interesting. I got to go back and listen to every episode. Have you asked this on every episode?
I have.
I'm going to go back and listen to the end of all the episodes I haven't listened to. Just to hear.
Actually, you know what I'm thinking about doing? Like, truly, like, so I'm thinking about at the end of the year, when I've got basically no more guests and everybody's on Christmas break or whatever, and they just want to binge on stuff, putting together a highlight reel of that answer for every single one.
That would make me want to go back and listen to the other one. So you definitely do that.
I'm gonna do that
because I've only listened to a couple, and now I'm hooked.
Oh man, that's fun.
Oh man, I don't want to say this, but like I don't have a story good enough to tell to answer that question. I guess the story will be the story of my wedding that's about to happen, and I'll tell it next time.
There you go.
I think if I could only tell one more story, aside from like my most recent airport horror story experience, I would probably tell the story of how my mom managed to unite our entire neighborhood when I was little around a holiday that no one else celebrates, and bring kids together to perform and parents together to watch from all around our neighborhood, like 50 kids, 150 people in the audience, to celebrate the first full moon after the first day of fall.
Wow.
And really if you want to hear the rest of it, I guess you'll have to come ask me about it.
All right. I'll have to come to Chicago then real soon.
Because I feel like it's not the story that's changed my life, but it's definitely something that's guided me through my life.
And it sounds like maybe it's an inspiration. Your mom did this to be kind, to connect, to do something cool, and like that's what you do now as a career. I feel like so.
Yeah, and it's a big surprise. My mom's in marketing too. So.
Oh, there you go. Now, if somebody were to tell you that, okay, you're all done telling stories, you've done it for a while, you got to go move on to something else, what would that last story look like for you?
How do you mean, Dan?
How would you go out if you could no longer be a storyteller? Is that even possible? I guess. I mean, I like asking this question because I like hearing what people's last story might be, what it might look like, how they'd go out in a flaming whatever.
Okay,
is it even possible?
No, it's not possible because we are continual storytellers. It's the nature of that neocortex, that brain that I was telling you. Mm-hmm. But if I reframe the question with your permission, Dan,
sure.
What story do I think I would like as a legacy? I would like to tell you a story. It's not that short an anecdote, but it's an interesting story. One of the one of the reasons I felt like I was qualified to write 7 stories, and it's an interesting thing when you start to be an author, is you have these feelings of self-doubt, like, you know, is there anything I have to say, right?
Yes.
Why would anyone want to even read it, you know? And I've had an experience that few salespeople have, and it's more by nature of my adventurous character. So you've kind of heard that I've lived and worked all over the world. And I have also jumped from industry to industry. So I've found myself in this sort of situation that every new salesperson finds themselves, which is, you know nothing. You don't know about your company's products and services. You haven't got a clue about your client. And you have to sell something. You've got this target, right? So, and this is a very confronting situation. Well, I've put myself through that 5 times. And that's unusual, right? Most people find a comfort area of business and they stick there, right? And what I've discovered is that that there are stories that you need. You need to seek out these stories. You need to be able to tell your company story. What is this company I'm working for? Who the hell are they? You know, how do I tell that story? Because that's what your client also wants to hear. They don't know your company. So when I was I went from selling high technology to selling cooking and cleaning and catering services in the oil and gas and mining industry. But we're not talking small contracts. We're talking 20, 30, $100 million contracts. And what I noticed in these contracts, this is in Australia, mostly in remote Australia, big mining camps, 10s, 30,000 people, big mining camps and oil and gas camps. What I noticed in our contracts was we had a requirement to hire a certain proportion of Indigenous people. So in Australia, we have about 1.5% of our population are the original Australian inhabitants. They've been here for 50,000 years. You have something similar in the United States. Many countries have that situation. So there would be like this 5, 10, 15% requirement for hiring locals. And it was in the contract. And I was bidding on these big tenders. And what I noticed almost immediately was we were non-compliant. We had a target of 10, we hit 2. And I start, you know, the engineer, you know, how's that? Why is that? And I got this sort of not very satisfactory answer, which was, it's impossible. We can't hit that target. So I started asking the clients, you know, so, you know, you've put this in the tender. Why are you asking for that? And, you know, what does it really mean for you? And what I found was that they really wanted to hit those targets, but they hadn't figured out how, and none of their contractors had either. They essentially put it out as like a hopeless problem. You know, we try and we fail. And so I had that kind of mulling around, you know, and if that's the, like, for me with sales, like an unsolved problem is something that keeps going in my mind. And then I noticed one of our contracts, which was up in the far northwest of Western Australia in an area called the Kimberley. And there's a mine there that mines, it's just about to finish production actually. It mines one of the only places in the world that mines pink diamonds. And it's called Argyle. And they had nearly 50% Indigenous participation in a 100-man workforce. And I'm like, wow, how do they do that? And so I'm back in headquarters in Melbourne. No one really knew. So I go, well, I'm going to go and find out. So I flew there and I met the contract manager, John Musty. And I'm like, well, how do you manage to do this? And he took me through this, you know, explaining to me what it's like. He said, Mike, these people, the first problem I have is I get their application and a huge proportion of them have a criminal record. And we have a corporate rule that says you can't hire people with a criminal record. And so does the mining customer, right? So, you know, that's first strike. So I go to the head of security and I say, look, you know, I've met this person. I'll vouch for them. They'll be inside the camp. They'll be okay. So I get past that. And then the next thing is they've never worked before. They've never held down a job. So I split all of the jobs down into the tiniest little task. Maybe it's making a bed. You're going to learn how to make a bed for the next few days. And then I add the tasks and then I get them out, multiple tasks. And then finally, after a few months, they can do every job in the camp. And then the next problem, they'll come to me and say, there's been a death in the family. And they come from very big tribal groups and they have very high levels of accident and injury, and they're expected to go to funeral. And for one thing, they have money and they're expected to fund the funeral, actually. She's like, well, do you have to go? And he says, sometimes you can see in their eyes that they don't really want to go. And so then he said, well, okay, he helps them. So they don't need to go. But if they have to go, here, the next question is, well, how long do you have to go for? And they'll say 2 days, said, okay, there'll be a car there waiting to bring you back to the camp after 2 days. And what he was laying out for me, Dan, was someone who wanted to solve the problem. And this is like the enlightenment for me was, the other camps, they don't actually want to solve this problem. They want to use all of the excuses there are, and there are many, to not hire these people. But what I saw was that when you get to 50-50 and you look at how the Indigenous people interact with the non-Indigenous people, they sit together at lunch, they're friendly, they're sharing jokes. They're not just like the 1 token or 2 token Indigenous people. They're just a normal part of the workforce. And that was inspiring. And I used that story, Dan, to win contracts and to change the way people think about how we hire Indigenous people. And I love that story.
If somebody said to you, all right, Park, you're done being a professional storyteller, you can't tell any more stories, what would you go out on? What kind of a story would you tell? What story would it be? What would it look like? How would you end your storytelling persona?
Oh my God. Hopefully, I would become somehow and magically an Olympic snow skier, because I absolutely love snow skiing. And I said, you know what? I'm not teaching story anymore. If you want to find me, I'll be up on the slopes or in the bar, and we'll share a beer and have a story there.
There you go. Absolutely.
That's such a great question, Dan. I don't know how that was the first thing that popped into mind. Now you're going to make me think about that all night long.
That sounds like a great story. If you think of anything different, shoot me a message, but that was a great story. And if you do want to go skiing, Michigan isn't the best place for skiing, but we have winter here, so come on up. Sean, if somebody told you today that you could tell no more stories and that tomorrow you're done, you got to find something different to do, what would your last story look like for you? What would you want to go out on?
Oh, gee, what am I going to go out on? I mean, there's for stories to be interesting, they sort of have to touch on those big themes of life, right? And the stories that I would go out on, it would be the stories of my family. I mean, they're one of the things that mean the most to me, and to be able to share a story. There's so many, but I mean, the one we touched on at the very beginning, of my father being a U.S. Marine and his this is apropos of nothing really, but except for the fact that he had this opportunity when, after the Kennedy assassination happened, him and 3 other riflemen. My dad was a sharpshooter. He was, before he even joined the Marines, he was the top shooter in New Jersey. So, he was, very good at what he did. He said it was one of the worst decisions he ever made was to tell the Marines he was a sharpshooter, because he ended up with really shitty jobs, I think, shooting people from a distance, I suppose. But after that happened, they actually erected a big tower, the same height as the book depository, and they had a moving vehicle, and they were all given the rifle that was used, the Italian rifle that was used by in the shooting, and it was a bolt action rifle. And he said that Dad was a good shot, but they had an Olympic level shot guy there, and they all had a go at it, and none of them came anywhere near hitting the target, right, for the distance and the equipment they were using. And so they wrote up their report and they handed it into the Warren Commission, sort of, with the idea that it'll all be worked out and they'll sort of, come to the right conclusion. And of course, when they got the result, they went, "What happened there?" So anyway, the best laid plans of mice and men, right?
Right. So sharing your dad's legacy would be a good way to go out, I think.
I think so.
That's good.
I think
Absolutely.
so. There's plenty of those stories.
So closes the chapter on 2018 for the Storytellers Network podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening. If this is your first exposure, be sure to go back and listen to the full interviews. As great as those last stories really are, the full conversation for each storyteller really brings something different to the journey of telling our stories better. inspiration, real-world applications, and advice, great personal stories from amazing storytellers who blessed me with the conversations. It has been a pretty amazing year. Visit thestorytellersnetwork.com for those episodes and other resources to inspire and help. And if you like what you've heard, please let me know with a review. I'm a very needy creator and artist, and I thrive on those compliments. Just kidding, mostly. But you can leave those reviews to show others that you've found a good podcast. And check out the show on Facebook and Instagram for notifications of new episodes right in your social media. You can share from there as well, or you can text Storytellers to 31996 to get yourself set up with subscribing to the show. Now, I truly do appreciate you listening to the show. Very real. This is a personal passion of mine and can feel kind of isolating and lonely as I produce this all on my own with no like immediate feedback. So it's good to know that I do have listeners out there. So feel free to send a message and connect. And here's to the next season. Inspirational storytellers like motivational speakers, amazing photographers, and others who inspire with their craft. That's season 5 of the Storytellers Network, Inspirational Storytellers. Until then, here's to telling our stories and having those stories to tell. Cheers.